The night was thick with fog, the kind that seemed to swallow everything in its path. If you stepped outside, you couldn't see more than a few feet in front of you. A strange, unnerving silence hung in the air. Not a single sound to break the tension. There was something about nights like this. Something unsettling. Something that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up as though you were being watched. Creepy, creepy. Have you ever felt that kind of weight in the air? You know, that subtle pressure, like someone is just behind you, watching, waiting. You turn around, but there's nothing there. Just shadows stretching in the dim light. The kind that dance and flicker in ways that make you question whether they're alive. But sometimes, there is someone there. James wasn't a superstitious man. He never believed in ghosts or anything that went bump in the night. He was a rational man. Practical. Even, his job as a night security guard was meant to keep him alert. After all, it wasn't unusual for things to go bump in an empty building, especially when there were all sorts of equipment. Old pipes and the odd creak in the floorboards. Still, tonight felt different. He could hear something, but it wasn't the usual sounds. It was something distinct, something deliberate. It was almost as if someone was following him. He glanced down the hallway, where the flickering fluorescent lights above seemed to cast long, jagged shadows. No one else was around. The entire building was empty, or at least it should have been. James had checked, made sure every door was locked, every window shut tight. No reason for anyone to be wandering the halls. And yet, there it was again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Soft, almost inaudible, but enough to send a cold shiver down his spine. He stopped, held his breath. There was nothing. The silence returned, but the tension remained. He forced himself to move forward. Every step he took, the feeling grew stronger. Something was there, but where? He spun around again, scanning the hallway. Nothing. The hall stretched on endlessly. The walls a monotonous grey, the air thick with stillness. No shadows moved, no doors creaked open. Yet, he felt it. Something was lurking just out of sight, watching him. A voice, a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable, slipped into his ear. James. His heart slammed against his ribs. He turned toward the sound, but no one was there. The hallway was empty, as it had been before. The voice had come from nowhere. His breath hitched. Panic began to rise in his chest. He wasn't alone. He couldn't be. There had to be someone else here. Someone hiding. Someone playing a sick prank on him. James. This time it was clearer, more distinct. It wasn't just a whisper. It was a soft, sinister drawl, a name being spoken by someone who knew him far too well. He stumbled backward, the back of his knees hitting a desk. He reached out, clutching it for support. His eyes darted around the room, searching the darkness, the corners of the hallway. Anything, but there was nothing. Just shadows, just silence. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his racing heart. He had to get a grip. This was just his imagination. He had been working late for days. The isolation was messing with his mind. That's all it was, just the isolation, nothing more. And yet, as the seconds passed, that growing unease gnawed at him, making him question everything. Why didn't the security cameras show anyone walking the hall? Why didn't anyone respond when he called out for backup? His hand reached instinctively for his walkie-talkie. His thumb brushed the button, and he heard his own voice crackling back to him, breaking the silence. Hello? Anyone? The static buzzed in his ear. Then came the same voice again, softer this time. A quiet murmur, so faint he almost thought it was the wind. You're not alone. His stomach dropped. His blood ran cold. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't in his head. Something was here. Someone was here. He felt a chill spread down his spine. The air felt suddenly colder. It wasn't just the temperature. It was the presence, the oppressive weight of it, as if the shadows themselves were alive, watching him, waiting for him to move, to make a mistake. James shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind. It had to be a prank. The building was huge, and it was easy for someone to sneak around, using the shadows to their advantage. But there was no way anyone could have gotten past the cameras without him noticing. There was no way anyone could have gotten into the building without him seeing them. And yet, the voice, the footsteps, the feeling of being watched. And then, just as he started to calm down, Just as he convinced himself it was all in his mind, he heard something else, a soft, scraping noise, as if someone were dragging their fingers along the concrete floor. The sound echoed down the hallway, sharp and grating, scraping against his nerves. James froze, his ears rang with the sound, his hand clenched tightly around the walkie-talkie. His thoughts were a jumbled mess. But there was one thing he knew for sure. Whatever was happening, it wasn't normal. It wasn't a prank. This was something else. The voice came again. But this time it wasn't his name. This time it was a command. Come to the stairwell. A shiver ran down James's spine. His body stiffened. But against his better judgment, he moved toward the stair. He told himself it was just his mind playing tricks. There was no one here. But as he neared the stairwell, he felt it again. The presence, pressing down on him, suffocating him. The air thickened. The shadows grew deeper, and the whispering. It didn't come to the stairwell. He was drawn to it now, like a moth to a flame. Every instinct told him to turn back, to run, but something else pushed him forward. Something darker, something more sinister. He couldn't stop himself, his legs carrying him toward the cold, dark stairwell. When he reached the door, it opened with a creak that sent a jolt of fear straight to his heart. The stairwell was even darker than the hallway. The kind of darkness that felt alive, that seemed to breathe with you. He stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind him with an eerie finality. A voice spoke again, this time louder, sharper. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. Down the stairs, without thinking, without hesitation, he descended. The stairs creaked under his weight, each step echoing in the vast, empty space. He was deep into the building now, deeper than he'd ever been before. There was a faint glow at the bottom of the stairwell, a light that flickered like a dying flame. And that's when he saw it, the shape, at the bottom of the stairs. Something tall, something long. The figure seemed to stretch unnaturally in the dim light. The shadows seemed to cling to it, to wrap around it like it was part of the darkness itself. James's breath caught in his throat. His hand shook as he reached for his walkie-talkie again, but it slipped from his grip, clattering to the ground below. The figure didn't move. It just stood there waiting. Come closer, the voice whispered. James couldn't move. He was frozen in place, his mind screaming for him to run. But his body wouldn't respond. The figure, it was watching him. Creepy. James's heartbeat thundered in his chest, each pulse a painful reminder that he was not alone in this place. His legs trembled, a strange numbness creeping up his spine, as if every fiber of his being knew something terrible was about to unfold. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure. It loomed in the darkness, an unnatural silhouette that seemed to stretch, to bend with the shadows themselves. The dim flicker of the light cast just enough illumination to reveal its outline, tall, gaunt, and eerily still. The longer James stared, the more the figure seemed to twist, its features becoming more blurred, as if reality itself were unwilling to allow it to exist fully. Come closer, the voice commanded again, the words soft and chilling. His throat went dry, and for a split second, James debated whether he should turn and flee up the stairs, abandoning the building and the night shift altogether. But his legs wouldn't move. They felt like they were cemented to the ground, his feet locked in place, as the figure in front of him continued to stand motionless, the heavy silence between them pressing down on him like a physical weight. Come closer. This time the voice was not merely a whisper. It was almost familiar. The cadence, the way the words rolled off the tongue, sent an uncomfortable jolt through his memory, stirring something he couldn't quite place. He had heard it before, but where, when, it didn't matter. What mattered now was that he could not tear his eyes from the figure. His instinct screamed at him to turn around, to break free of this strange paralysis. But the presence in the stairwell, whatever it was, had a grip on him. The room around him seemed to narrow, as if the walls themselves were closing in, pressing him towards the shadow. Closer, and before he knew it, his feet began to move, against his will, like some unseen force was guiding him down the stairs, deeper into the dark heart of the building. He wanted to stop, to scream, to shout for help, but his voice wouldn't come. All he could do was each step took him closer, to the figure, closer to the darkness, that seemed to beckon with malevolent intent. He reached the bottom of the stairs, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The cold of the stairwell enveloped him, creeping under his skin, making him shiver despite the warmth of his uniform. The figure stood still, its form now unmistakable. A person, or at least what appeared to be a person, but there was something fundamentally wrong about it. It was too tall, its limbs too long, and its posture was unnatural, as if it had been twisted and bent into a shape that didn't belong. James tried to look away, but his eyes were drawn back to it, unwilling to break contact. His body felt like a puppet on strings, each movement dictated by a force beyond his control. Closer, it whispered again, but now the voice sounded different. It had a sharp edge to it, as if there was a hidden threat, a promise of something darker if he didn't comply. And then it moved. The figure's long, spindly arms reached out toward him, its fingers too thin, too long, like skeletal appendages scraping through the air. He could feel the air shift as it approached, a cold breeze that made his skin prickle. He wanted to scream, he wanted to run, but his legs refused to obey him. All he could do was stand there, staring into the abyss of its empty eyes. Those eyes, dark, hollow, were all he could see now, consuming every thought, every ounce of rationality he had left. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating him as he slowly, inexorably took another step forward. Something in the pit of his stomach twisted painfully, a feeling of utter dread that seemed to gnaw at his very soul. The air grew thicker, heavier, suffused with a presence that felt ancient, malevolent. It was too late. He didn't realize it at first, but somehow, without him even noticing, the room had changed. The walls were no longer the dull grey concrete they had been. Now they were covered in a damp, blackened substance that resembled decay. The air reeked of rot, and the temperature had dropped even further, the cold now biting into his skin with an icy ferocity. James's mind spun, the edges of his vision beginning to blur. Was this real? Was he dreaming? The figure's fingers were inches from his face now, its cold touch so close that he could feel the chill emanating from it, even though it hadn't yet made contact. Closer, it urged again, but this time the voice was not soft. It was filled with an insidious urgency. Without thinking, his hand shot out toward it. His fingers brushed against its skin, and the moment they made contact, something cold and slick shot through him, spreading like poison through his veins. His vision blurred even more, the shadows around him seeming to grow thicker, dark. He could hear faint whispers, voices, thousands of voices, all speaking in a language he didn't understand, their words reverberating in his skull. The room, or what was left of it, felt as if it were alive, as if the very walls were closing in on him, squeezing, pressing, suffocating. He tried to pull his hand back, but it was as if he was glued to it, unable to free himself. His heart pounded, the sound ringing in his ears, his breaths becoming shallow and desperate. Then, with a sudden sharp motion, the figure jerked its head toward him. Its mouth opened, stretching impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within its throat, vibrating through the very air around them. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was no longer familiar. It was something else, something ancient, and full of malice. James stumbled back, his body finally responding to the surge of fear coursing through him. But it was too late. The figure's hand shot forward, grabbing him by the wrist with an unrelenting grip. The coldness of its touch burned through him, making his skin crawl. His breath caught in his throat as the figure leaned in close. He could feel its rancid breath, cold and foul, against his face. The words came again, but they were no longer words, just an overwhelming, horrifying pressure in his mind, a sense of something ancient, something evil, pushing him, pulling him toward the darkness. And then, as if in answer to his silent plea, the building itself seemed to respond. The shadows writhed, the walls groaned, and the air turned heavy, pressing down on him like a living thing. James could feel the very fabric of reality bending, warping, shifting around him, and for a moment, for a single terrifying moment, he wondered if this was it, if this was the end of everything. And then, nothing. A deafening silence fell over the stairwell. The figure vanished, leaving only the overwhelming sensation of emptiness, of something lost, something that could never be regained. James stood there in the darkness, shaking. His mind raced. Was it over? Had it been a dream? No, it wasn't over. The silence that had settled in the stairwell was just the beginning. The darkness, the shadows, they were still there, watching, waiting, and James had just stepped into something far worse than he could ever have imagined. James's heart hammered in his chest. The silence around him, a maddening contrast to the chaos that churned inside his mind. His hands shook uncontrollably as he gripped the railing of the stairs, trying to steady himself, but the sensation of the figure's cold touch still burned on his skin, like a searing brand that wouldn't fade. It was still here, he could feel it, its presence lingering in the very air, suffocating him. The shadows that surrounded him seemed to pulse with life, moving ever so slightly, as if they were aware of his every move. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind racing for answers. He wanted to run, to escape, but his legs felt like lead, each step a monumental effort. His eyes scanned the stairwell, looking for any sign of the figure, any sign of life, but there was nothing, just the dark suffocating air and the oppressive weight of silence. But then, a soft scraping, faint but unmistakable. His blood ran cold. The sound was so subtle, so quiet, but it sent a shiver through him, every nerve on high alert. It was coming from the far corner of the stairwell, near the bottom of the stairs. He didn't want to turn around. He didn't want to face whatever was lurking in the darkness, but he had no choice. His body moved of its own accord against his will, as though some invisible force were guiding him toward the source of the sound. James reached the bottom of the stairs, his eyes darting from one shadow to the next, each one darker, deeper than the last. The silence seemed to wrap around him, thickening, pressing down on him until it was nearly unbearable. He could hear his own breathing, shallow and frantic, as he moved deeper into the stairwell. Where is it? He squinted into the blackness, trying to make out any shape, any movement, but it was as if the shadows themselves were swallowing everything, hiding whatever was lurking just out of sight. And then, there it was, a figure, standing motionless at the far end of the stairwell. At first, James thought it was just another trick of the light, another illusion conjured by his terrified mind. But no, it was real. The figure was tall, even taller than the first, its outline jagged and unnatural, as if it were not fully part of the world around it. He wanted to scream, to run, but the words caught in his throat. The air was thick with an unseen force, pressing him closer to the figure, pulling him forward against his will. The scraping sound came again, louder this time, and it was accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, a voice that seemed to come from all directions, surrounding him like a cocoon. James. The voice. It was the same voice from before, the voice that had haunted his every step, the voice that had pulled him deeper into this nightmare. But now, it sounded different. It was more urgent, desperate. James, come closer. He didn't want to. He could. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, to escape this place, to never look back. But his body, no longer under his control, moved forward, step by slow step, until he was standing at the bottom of the stairs, mere feet away from the and then, in the eerie stillness of the stairwell, it turned to face him. The figure was even more grotesque up close. Its skin was pale and stretched too tight over its bones, its limbs unnaturally long and the shadows around it clung to its body, warping its form, making it appear even more twisted, more alien. Its face was nothing more than a hollow mask, empty eyes that glowed with an unnatural light, like two burning coals in a hollowed-out skull. James tried to step back, but his feet were rooted to the spot. The figure moved toward him with a slow, deliberate motion, its long arms swaying at its sides like branches in the wind. Closer, the voice repeated in his mind, and this time it was not a suggestion, it was a command. The figure reached out, its fingers long and skeletal, its touch cold as ice. James's heart raced, his entire body frozen in place, unable to move, unable to react. He was trapped. In the blink of an eye, the figure was right in front of him, its face inches from his own. He could feel the chill radiating off of it, could see the darkness in its eyes, a void that seemed to pull him in, to swallow him whole. His breath caught in his throat as the figure opened its mouth, a jagged, horrifying grin, stretching across its face, showing rows of sharp yellowed teeth that looked like they had never been used. Until now. No, no, James whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible in the suffocating silence. What do you want? The figure's mouth twitched as if it were amused by his question. Its voice, when it finally spoke, was deep, resonating in his bones, a sound that felt like it was coming from the very depths of the earth. You should have never come here, James. The words echoed in his mind, louder and louder, until they consumed everything. He could feel the pressure building, the force of its presence pressing in from all sides. His vision blurred, his thoughts fractured, and then, a terrible realization sank into his bones. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was real. and there was no escape. The figure moved even closer, its face mere inches from his own, its cold breath like the touch of death itself against his skin. James could feel the darkness suffocating him, pressing in from every direction. His chest tightened, his breath coming in ragged gasps, as his body fought for end. And then, the figure smiled. It wasn't a smile of kindness or amusement, it was the grin of something far older, far more malevolent. It was a smile that promised pain, that promised torment. And in that smile James saw something more than just a twisted being. It was a glimpse into the void, into the abyss that stretched beyond the boundaries of time and space. You've already made your choice, James. The figure's voice rumbled, low and haunting, as its hands reached out to grab him. But just before it could make contact, a deafening crack split the air, a sound like thunder, followed by a violent tremor that shook the very foundation of the building. James's body jerked backward, his mind reeling. The figure's hands stopped just short of his face, the darkness around him pulsing like a living thing. The air itself seemed to warp and ripple, distorting everything around him, and for a moment he could hear nothing but the deafening hum of something ancient, something powerful. And then, silence. It was over. For a brief moment, James thought he had escaped, that whatever had been holding him had loosened its grip. He dared to take a breath, to open his eyes. But when he did, he found himself standing in a different place altogether. The stairwell was gone. Instead he was in a vast, empty room, its walls covered in blackened, decaying walls, and the air was thick with the stench of rot. A flickering light overhead cast long shadows across the floor, but it was the figure standing in front of him just as tall, just as terrible, that made his stomach churn. And the voice came again, this time louder, more triumphant. "Welcome to your new home, James." James's mind was a whirlwind of terror, confusion, and disbelief. His chest heaved as he tried to process what had just happened. One moment, he had been standing at the bottom of the stairwell, feeling the cold, unrelenting presence of the figure. The next, he was here somewhere else, somewhere he couldn't explain, an empty, decaying room that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick with the scent of rot, and the walls, if you could even call them walls, seemed to pulsate, as though they were alive, breathing. The flickering light above him cast erratic shadows that seemed to dance across the floor, moving with a mind of their own. It was like he had stepped into another realm, one that defied all sense of logic, where the laws of time and space no longer applied. This isn't real, he thought, but the cold, biting air against his skin told him otherwise. His heart was pounding in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stood frozen, staring at the figure before him, the one who had led him here, the one who had brought him here. The figure hadn't moved, but its presence filled the room, an oppressive weight that seemed to crush the very air around them. Its hollow eyes never left James's face, and the sinister grin, sharp, jagged, and too wide, was still stretched across its face. It was no longer a question of if James would escape. It was a matter of when he would finally break. "Welcome to your new home, James." The voice, deep and resonant, echoed in his mind, the words sinking into his consciousness like nails into wood. There was no compassion in it, no mercy, just a cold, calculating command. James swallowed hard, his throat dry, the taste of fear thick in his mouth. "What is this place?" His voice was barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of his dread. The figure's smile widened, a grotesque display of satisfaction. "This is where things like you go," it said, its words slithering through the air, thick with malice. "This is where lost souls come to live out their final days." James's stomach churned, and the darkness around him seemed to press in even closer. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, but there was no way out. The walls were seamless, the corners indistinct, as if they stretched on forever, like a labyrinth that twisted and turned into oblivion. There was no door, no window, no exit. "Lost souls," he repeated, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. He tried to make sense of it, but his mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. The room felt suffocating, the shadows almost alive, as though they were watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering him. Its eyes glowed faintly, the flickering light above making them seem even darker, deeper. "Yes, you're here now, James. You've been chosen. You're part of the collection." The figure's grin stretched even further, if that was possible, and James's heart skipped a beat. The collection, that's what the figure had called it. James's mind raced. Chosen, what did that mean? Part of the collection. Was this some kind of sick joke? Some kind of punishment? Was this just his mind cracking under the pressure of his isolation? His exhaustion from working late night? But there was nothing about this place that felt like a dream. This was real. The air was thick with a scent of decay. The oppressive weight of the figure's presence looming over him, suffocating him. He could feel it in his bones. Something ancient, something terrifying was at play here. You're one of us now, James. The figure continued, its voice like the scraping of metal on stone. You'll never leave. This place is your home now, forever. No, the word escaped James's lips before he could stop it. I don't belong here. This isn't real. I'm not part of anything. I just want to leave. He backed away, his legs trembling beneath him, but the figure didn't move. It simply watched him, its hollow eyes burning into him, as if savoring his You can't leave, it said, its voice a low growl, filled with dark amusement. Not anymore. The moment you crossed into this place, you were ours, and now, James, now you will stay. You will be part of the collection, just like the others. The words hung in the air, suffocating him. The collection. What did that mean? What were these others the figure spoke of? His eyes flicked nervously to the edges of the room, searching desperately for some way out, some escape, but there was nothing. The walls were endless, stretching far beyond what his eyes could see. The shadows seemed to stretch on forever, crawling across the floor like dark tendrils reaching out for him. And then he noticed something. At the far corner of the room, near the flickering light, something shifted. The shadow detached itself from the wall, moving as though it had a life of its own. It was a figure, but it was different from the one in front of him. This one was hunched over, its body unnaturally thin, its movements jerky and erratic. James's breath caught in his throat as he watched the figure shuffle closer, its hollow eyes staring directly at him. The figure's skin was pale, stretched tight over its bones, its mouth gaping open in a silent scream, as though it were trapped in some eternal agony. It didn't need to. The terror in its eyes was enough. The figure moved toward James, its skeletal hands reaching out with unnatural speed. It's coming for you, the figure before him whispered, its grin widening. The collection, it never stops growing. James's pulse quickened. He felt like a trapped animal, cornered and helpless. The shadow that was moving toward him seemed to have no end, as if it was simply part of the room itself, part of the nightmare that had ensnared him. The cold air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around him. The sound of the figure's footsteps echoed, low and eerie, as it slowly crept toward him. James, the voice of the figure before him crooned. The collection calls. You can't escape it now. With every passing moment, the room seemed to grow smaller, the shadows more alive, more hungry. The figures, the lost souls the figure had mentioned, moved slowly, dragging themselves toward him, with eyes empty of hope, their twisted forms as much a part of this place as the darkness that consumed it. James tried to back away, but his body was heavy, weighed down by the air, by the suffocating sense of dread that pressed in on him from all sides. Every corner of the room seemed to distort, warp, until the entire place was a nightmare, a prison of eternal darkness and horror. He could hear the figures moving, shuffling closer, their raspy breathing, filling the room with an unsettling chorus of sounds. Their eyes followed him, never blinking, never leaving his face. You can't run from it, the figure before him said, its voice dripping with malice. You can't escape. James's heart raced in his chest, the walls of the room closing in on him. As the shadows crept forward, the air felt thick with dread, as if the very fabric of the space around him were shifting, folding into itself, trapping him in an endless, suffocating void. And then the shadow in the corner lunged, its cold fingers brushing against his skin. Everything went black. Creepy, creepy. James's eyes snapped open, but it wasn't the bright glow of the stairwell that greeted him. Instead, it was the same darkness, the same suffocating void that had enveloped him moments before. His chest heaved as he gasped for air, but it felt as though the very atmosphere around him was thick with something foul, something ancient. His throat was dry, his mouth tasting of rot, and as he tried to push himself upright, the weight of the room seemed to press him down. He was still in the same place, A decaying, endless room, surrounded by nothing but shadows. But something had changed. The air felt heavier now, and the figures that had been lurking in the corners before were no longer standing still. They were moving, crawling, slithering closer, their distorted bodies dragging across the floor with an eerie grace, as if they were more part of the darkness than they were human. James recoiled, his heart slamming in his chest. The realization hit him like a cold wave. He was trapped in some nightmare. His mind raced, but the thoughts felt like they were slipping away from him, like they were being absorbed by the oppressive darkness around him. He blinked rapidly, trying to shake the feeling of dread that clung to him, but it only deepened with each passing second. The walls, if you could even call them walls, continued to shift, their boundaries stretching and warping in ways that defied logic. The room itself felt like it was alive, pulsating, reacting to his every movement, and there, in the center of it all, was the figure, the one that had led him here, the one that had chosen him. It was still watching him, its hollow eyes fixed on his every twitch, every breath. The grin on its face was as wide as ever, jagged and cruel, showing a row of teeth that seemed too sharp to be human. "You can't escape," it said, its voice a low growl that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. "No one escapes, not from here, not from the collection." James's mind screamed for an answer, for a way out, but his body remained frozen, as if the darkness itself was holding him in place. The room felt like it was closing in on him, its walls pressing in from every side, its shadows stretching toward him, like fingers desperate to grab hold. "This is your new reality," the figure continued, its voice soft now, almost tender, "a reality where you are nothing more than a piece of the collection, just one of the many, a part of something far older than you can understand." James tried to move, tried to fight back, but it was as if his limbs had become weighed down by cement. The shadows swirled around him, creeping up his legs, his arms, as if they were alive, part of the twisted, nightmarish world that surrounded him. The coldness of their touch burned against his skin, and he could feel their fingers, their presence, as they wrapped around him like chains. He wanted to scream, he wanted to break free, but there was no sound, no escape. The figures, those twisted, hunched forms, had gathered closer now, their eyes glowing with that same hollow light, their mouths agape in silent screams. They were reaching for him, their fingers twitching, their twisted limbs stretching toward him. In the darkness, the room had become a prison of shadows, a place where time seemed to lose all meaning. James tried again to pull himself free, but as he did, he stumbled, falling to the ground. The cold concrete was like ice beneath him, biting into his skin. He looked up, and that's when he saw a new shape, one that he hadn't noticed before. At the far side of the room, another figure stood. This one was different, taller, more imposing. Its silhouette was sharper, its edges more defined, as though it were carved out of the darkness itself. The figure's eyes were not hollow like the others, they were glowing, a bright sickly yellow that shone through the dark like the eyes of a predator. James could feel the weight of its gaze on him, and instinctively, he knew this figure was the one in charge, the lead, the one who controlled this place. He tried to move, but his body betrayed him again. The shadows clung to him, pulling him down, and he could feel the figures, those grotesque creatures, closing in on him, their cold fingers grazing his skin. It was like they were feeding off his fear, drawing strength from his helplessness. He could feel his soul being dragged into the depths of the darkness, his very essence being absorbed into this nightmarish world. "It's too late for you, James," the figure in front of him said. Its voice was smooth, almost comforting, but there was a venomous edge to it, a hunger that cut through the calm. "You belong to the collection now, just like the others before you, and when your time comes, when the collection is full, you'll be added to it, just like all the rest." The words sent a chill down James's spine, and the realization hit him with the force of 1,000 blows. The collection wasn't just a metaphor, it was real. These figures, these lost souls, were all trapped here, pulled into this place, just like he had been. There was no escape. He had become part of the collection, and when his time came, he too would be added to the horrors that lurked in this endless, suffocating darkness. The figure's grin widened, its teeth gleaming in the dim light. "Don't worry, James, you'll get used to it. We all did." And then, before he could respond, before he could even begin to process what was happening, the darkness seemed to close in around him, swallowing him whole. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no sight, no feeling, just a vast, empty void. But then, something strange happened. A light, faint at first, barely a glimmer, but it grew brighter, more intense, until it filled the room. It was a light so blinding that it burned into his eyes, sending shards of pain through his skull. The shadows recoiled from it, retreating into the corners of the room, their presence diminished, as though the light had power over them. But the figures didn't stop, they didn't flinch, they moved closer, their eyes still glowing, their hands reaching for him. The only thing that seemed to offer any hope, was fading. James tried to scream, to cry out for help, but his voice was drowned by the rising tide of darkness. The shadows seemed to have a life of their own, clawing their way back toward him, pulling him deeper into the abyss. And as the light dimmed to nothing, he understood with sickening clarity, there was no escaping this place, there was no escape from the collection. He was one of them now, and he would remain here forever. Creepy, the darkness was suffocating, pressing in on James, from all sides, wrapping around him like a heavy blanket, stifling his breath. The light that had appeared, that faint glimmer of hope, was gone now, swallowed by the relentless shadows that clawed at his mind and soul. His body felt cold, colder than he had ever felt before, as though the very essence of life was being drained from him, absorbed into the void that now surrounded him. This is it, the thought echoed in his mind, like a funeral bell, tolling for what seemed like an eternity. This is where I'll stay, forever. James wanted to fight it, he wanted to break free from the crushing weight of despair, to tear through the shadows that seemed to curl around him, like tendrils of some dark ancient beast. But the more he struggled, the more the darkness seemed to tighten its grip, pressing him deeper into the void, until all that remained was the cold, unyielding pressure. He was aware of his surroundings, though he wished he could block them out. The figures, those twisted creatures that had once only hovered in the periphery of his vision, now stood in front of him, their faces just inches from his own. Their hollow eyes gleamed in the dark, an unnatural light that pierced the abyss. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own frantic breathing, shallow and ragged. They're here, they're all here. James's heart thundered in his chest, his mind raced, but every thought seemed to slip through his fingers, like trying to hold on to water. The realization that this was his reality now, that he was surrounded by these things, that he was one of them trapped in this realm, with no way out, was almost too much to bear. And yet in the midst of the suffocating despair, there was something else, a faint distant echo, a whisper, a flicker in the darkness. James. A voice. It wasn't the figure, it wasn't the leader of this nightmare, it was different, softer, familiar. He felt his breath catch. Could it be? Was someone else? James, the voice called again, more urgent this time. It was the whisper of someone he knew, someone who had been in his life before the shadows, before the collection. He couldn't be sure. It was hard to think clearly in the dark, with the weight of the shadow pressing down on him, clouding his thoughts. But the voice, it was so familiar, so he forced himself to focus, to push past the suffocating grip of the void. He wasn't sure where it was coming from, or even if he had heard it at all, but he couldn't ignore it. There was something in it that stirred him, something that felt like a lifeline, a thread in the dark he couldn't remember much about. Before this place, his memory was muddled, like the fog of a dream that had slipped away in the morning light. But the voice, James, the voice called again, louder this time, cutting through the fog, pulling him closer to the edge of consciousness. You're not alone. Something shifted inside of him, a spark, a faint glimmer of hope. James's head snapped up, his eyes searching the darkness. He was unsure of what he was looking for, but he felt something stirring deep inside, a need to find that voice, to reach for. It was distant, far away, but he could feel its presence, like a faint pull, a thread that connected him to something outside this nightmare. James, the voice said again, and this time, there was no mistaking it. It was closer now, a whisper so clear it sent a chill down his spine. He wasn't sure if it was his mind playing tricks on him, if he was spiraling into madness, but he had to know, he had to try. Taking a tentative step forward, he moved through the darkness, guided only by the sound of that voice. The figures around him seemed to recoil, retreating into the shadows, as if they too were afraid of it. He couldn't see them clearly, but he could feel their presence closer now, yet somehow weaker, more distant than before. The shadows seemed to part in front of him, allowing him a fleeting moment of space. His breath caught in his throat as he stumbled forward, his body still heavy with the weight of the void. But there was something ahead of him, a shift in the air, the faintest touch of light, shimmering through the pitch-black world around him. It was then that he realized, the voice wasn't just calling to him, it was leading him somewhere. He pushed forward again, his legs aching with every step, his mind dizzy with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The room, or whatever it was, seemed to shift around him, the darkness pressing in on all sides, but there was a pull in the air, an invisible force guiding him onward. The figures were still there, still watching him, but they no longer felt as threatening. They seemed to be retreating, their eyes dimming, their shapes becoming less distinct. James moved faster now, driven by the need to find the source of the voice, to break free of this place, this nightmare. The air grew thinner, the cold less biting, as he continued to push forward. And then, just when he thought he couldn't take another step, when his legs felt ready to give way beneath him, he saw it. A door. It was barely visible at first, just a faint outline in the distance. But it was there, a door, real, tangible, a way out. James's heart leaped in his chest, a surge of adrenaline flooding through his veins. He didn't know what lay on the other side, but he couldn't stay here any longer. He had to get out. James, the voice cried again, its urgency clear now. It wasn't just a whisper anymore, it was a call for him to hurry. With everything he had left, James pushed forward, stumbling toward the door. The shadows seemed to recoil as he approached, as if the very act of moving toward the light was enough to make them retreat. His fingers brushed the cold metal of the door handle, and with a final burst of strength, he twisted it and pulled. The door opened, revealing nothing but white light, bright, pure, and blinding. Before he could step through, before he could even make sense of what was happening, the darkness around him surged one last time. The room seemed to close in on him, the figures crowding forward with horrifying speed. But the light, it was stronger now. It enveloped him, pushing the darkness back. It was like a wave swallowing him whole. And then, he was gone. The door slammed shut behind him, and the darkness, the collection, was no more. But as the light began to fade, as his senses returned, a single thought remained. Had he really escaped? Creepy, creepy. The blinding light that had consumed James now began to dim, its intensity slowly fading into a dull, lifeless glow. The silence that followed was suffocating, almost oppressive in its stillness. He stood there, unsure of where he was or what was happening. His body still felt numb, his limbs heavy, as though he had just awakened from a long, disorienting sleep. He blinked several times, trying to adjust his eyes to the light. The bright, searing light that had pulled him out of the suffocating darkness now felt wrong. It wasn't pure, it wasn't comforting. There was something off about it, something that made him uneasy. James took a step forward, his heart thudding in his chest. The air around him felt strangely crisp, colder than it should have been. The familiar warmth of the shadows, the weight of the collection, had disappeared. But that didn't mean he wasn't sure what to expect. As the light continued to fade, was he out? Had he truly escaped? Or was this just another layer of the nightmare? Another trap designed to pull him back in, to claim him once again? He could feel the pulse of fear building in his chest, but he refused to give. He forced his mind to remain clear, to stay focused on the reality in front of him. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to end this, to escape whatever grip the collection still had on him. The light finally dimmed to the point where he could make out his surroundings. His eyes scanned the area, and for a moment he thought he was seeing things. He wasn't in the decaying room anymore. He wasn't even in the stairwell, or the building where it had all begun. He was in a hallway, one that seemed unnervingly familiar. The walls were clean, white, and sterile. The floor was smooth, polished. Everything about it screamed normality, an artificial calm that only served to heighten his sense of unease. This wasn't supposed to be real. It couldn't be real. The hallway stretched on, seemingly endless, with doors on either side. The flickering light overhead cast long, distorted shadows across the floor, and the silence was overwhelming. But even in this quiet, everything felt wrong. He walked forward slowly, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The shadows that had once chased him, that had twisted and contorted in ways he couldn't fathom, seemed to be gone, but something still lingered in the air, something that made the back of his neck prickle, something that felt like he was being watched. Suddenly one of the doors along the hallway opened with a soft creak, and a figure stepped out. James froze in place, his breath catching in his throat. The figure was tall, its features obscured by the flickering light. He couldn't make out its face, but he knew without a doubt that it was them, the ones who had been part of the collection, the ones who had been trapped, lost, consumed by the darkness. James, the figure said, its voice low and rasping, sending a cold chill down his spine. He took a step back, instinctively, but the figure moved closer,
its presence filling the hallway. Despite its obscured form, he could feel the same malevolent energy radiating off it, the same dark force that had consumed the collection. "You thought you escaped," the figure continued, its voice growing colder, sharper. "But there is no escape, James. You can never leave." His stomach twisted into knots as the realization sank in. This wasn't just another hallucination. This wasn't just another hallucination. This was real. He hadn't left the collection at all. He had returned to it. "No," James whispered, his voice cracking as the horror took root in his chest. "No. This can't be happening." But it was. The figure was right in front of him now, its face still hidden, its form more solid, more tangible than the shadows that had once surrounded him. It reached out, its cold hand brushing his arm, and a wave of dread washed over him. "You are one of us, James," the figure rasped. "You belong to the collection, forever." The words felt like a weight around his neck, tightening with every breath. The figure's touch sent a jolt of cold through his body, and for a brief moment, it felt as though his entire being was being pulled away from him, as though he were being consumed by the very darkness he had fought so hard to escape. He stumbled backward, his legs shaking beneath him, but the figure's grip tightened. It was as if the very air around him had become thick and suffocating, as though the walls of the hallway were closing in, narrowing with every second that passed. "No!" James cried out, panic clawing at his throat. "Let me go." But the figure's grip remained unyielding, its voice growing more insistent. "You can't escape. None of us can." The hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, a never-ending tunnel of light and shadow. The doors along the sides flickered, their outlines changing as he tried to focus on them. The room seemed to warp and twist, and he realized with horror that the hallway was not a place of refuge. It was a part of the collection, a part of the nightmare that had followed him, that would always follow him. "Why are you doing this?" James gasped, his breath ragged, his pulse racing. "What do you want from me?" The figure's head tilted, as if considering his question. "We are all trapped here, James," it said softly, its voice almost pitying. "You're just the newest addition. There's no escaping what we are, no escaping what this place." The darkness around him seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat, echoing in his mind. It was as though everything, the walls, the floor, the air itself, was alive, drawing him in, pulling him back to where it all began. "No," James said, shaking his head, fighting to push away the terror that threatened to consume him. "I won't stay. I won't be a part of this collection." The figure leaned in closer, its face still obscured, but its voice sharp and cold. "You have no choice, James. None of us do." And then, as if to make his point clearer, the door behind him slammed open with a deafening crash. Through the doorway, the familiar twisted figures of the collection poured into the hallway, their hollow eyes staring at him with cold, unblinking intensity. Their shapes seemed to shift in the light, their limbs contorting unnaturally, their presence suffocating. The darkness was closing in once again, just as it had before. James's mind reeled, his thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. The figures were all around him now, filling the hallway with their terrible presence. They reached out with cold, skeletal hands, their eyes gleaming with an unholy hunger. This wasn't escape, it was just the beginning. As the shadows closed in on him, James felt his body tremble, his breath shallow, his mind racing with one final horrifying thought: there is no way out. And with that, the darkness consumed him once more. Creepy creep.